Nestled in the north woods of Minnesota, Crystal Lake shimmers like a shard of broken glass. Surrounded by dense forests, the lake seems untouched, almost sacred in its isolation. Beneath the surface, the water is dark, hiding secrets in its murky depths. Tales whispered around crackling campfires paint a chilling portrait of a restless spirit, forever bound to the lake's desolate shores. For as long as anyone can remember, the legend of the woman in white has been intertwined with Crystal Lake's history. Some whisper she was a young bride left at the altar, driven to madness by her grief. Others claim she was a grieving mother, searching for a child lost to the lake's depths. Fishermen speak of seeing a ghostly figure in their peripheral vision, a fleeting glimpse of white disappearing into the trees. These encounters, though brief, leave an indelible mark on the soul, a stark reminder that some legends are rooted in a terrifying reality. Descriptions of the woman in white vary, but certain details remain consistent. She is tall and slender, her form almost translucent, as if woven from mist and moonlight. Her long dark hair with streaks of blonde hangs in tangled strands, framing a face obscured by shadow and the passage of time. The woman in white is always clad in a long, flowing gown. Its once pristine white, now the color of aged bone. Those unfortunate enough to have seen her face speak of eyes hollowed by an eternity of suffering, burning with a cold, malevolent light. This is John's story. A weathered fisherman found himself drawn to Crystal Lake's deceptively serene shores. He often sought refuge in his small fishing boat, casting his line into the dark water, seeking solace from the turmoil that plagued his marriage. Despite the hushed warnings from the locals, John remained unconvinced. He scoffed at the idea of a vengeful spirit, clinging to the belief that logic and reason held dominion over the unseen world. The sun began its descent, casting long shadows that stretched across the water like grasping claws. John, lost in his thoughts, remained oblivious to the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The air, once pleasantly warm, grew heavy with an unnatural chill. It was then that John felt it, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, as though he were being watched. He recalled the stories he'd heard, the whispers of a woman in white who haunted the lake. Suddenly his fishing rod bent sharply, the line singing as something powerful pulled on the other end. His heart pounded in his chest, a mixture of excitement and trepidation coursing through him. As he struggled to reel in his catch, the wind picked up, whipping around him in a frenzy. A figure as pale as moonlight and shrouded in flowing white garments began to take form amidst the swaying trees. The wind howled like a banshee, whipping the woman's tattered gown around her skeletal frame. John, preoccupied with his catch, remained oblivious to the spectral figure slowly emerging from the tree line. She moved with an eerie, almost fluid grace, her bare feet seemingly gliding over the rough terrain. Her white dress, once a symbol of purity and innocence, now hung in tatters, stained with the grime of the grave and the passage of time. John, his senses finally attuned to the danger lurking nearby, felt a shiver crawl down his spine. There, standing at the water's edge, was the figure he had so readily dismissed as mere folklore. John's grip on the fishing rod slackened, the line falling limp. He had scoffed at the stories, brushed them aside as superstitious nonsense. Yet here she stood before him, a terrifying embodiment of every chilling tale he had ever heard. A low, mournful wail escaped her lips, a sound that seemed to emanate from the depths of the lake itself. John's breath caught in his throat, his body paralyzed by a fear so profound that it threatened to consume him entirely. The woman in white took another step closer, her ragged gown trailing behind her like a funeral shroud. John recoiled from the sight, his stomach churning with a mixture of terror and revulsion. The scent of decay, heavy and cloying, wafted towards him, clinging to the back of his throat like bile. He fumbled for the boat's motor, his hands shaking so violently that he could barely grip the pull cord. The engine sputtered and coughed but refused to catch. John watched in horror as she drifted towards him, her form becoming more and more insubstantial with each passing moment. John's eyes snapped open, his body jerking upright. He was drenched in a cold sweat, his heart pounding against his ribs like a frantic bird trying to escape its cage. The memory of the woman in white, her skeletal hand reaching for him, flashed before his eyes. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie calm. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to pierce through the dense canopy of trees. Ignoring the throbbing pain in his head, John grabbed the oars and began rowing towards the shore with a desperate urgency. As John neared the shore, a wave of relief washed over him. Solid ground, safety, he could almost taste it. But as he pulled the boat up onto the muddy bank and scrambled out, his blood ran cold. There, half hidden amongst the trees, a flash of white caught his eye. It was her, the woman in white. John didn't hesitate. He scrambled back into the boat, pushing off from the shore with all his might. He didn't dare look back, but he could hear her, the soft shuffling sound of her bare feet on the dry leaves. Exhaustion gnawed at John's muscles, his arms screaming in protest with every pull of the oars. The shoreline seemed no closer than it had been moments ago. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The woman in white was still there, her white form a stark contrast against the dark foliage. John's heart hammered in his chest, each beat a frantic drum solo against the silence of the morning. He looked down at the water, its surface deceptively calm and inviting. As the chilling laughter of the woman in white echoed across the water, he made his choice. The surface of Crystal Lake remained unbroken, a mirror reflecting the cloudless sky above. The early morning sun, no longer obscured by the dense canopy of trees, bathed the scene in a deceptively serene light. Birdsong filled the air, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had descended just moments before. Beneath the surface, however, a different story unfolded. John's body, limbs heavy with the weight of his choice, sank deeper into the murky depths. The sunlight above, a beacon of hope just moments ago, faded into an impenetrable darkness. He was alone. But he wasn't alone. A chilling presence, unseen and unheard in the world above, materialized beside him. The woman in white, her tattered gown billowing around her like a shroud of death, had followed him. Her touch, icy cold and laced with the power of the abyss, sent shivers of pure terror through his soul. And then silence. The woman in white, her grim task complete, vanished back into the depths, leaving behind only the memory of her touch and the chilling knowledge that some choices offer no escape, only a terrifying descent into oblivion. It pressed down on John as he drifted in the boat, a silence so profound it seemed to amplify every beat of his terrified heart. The gentle lapping of water against the wooden hull, usually a soothing rhythm, now sounded like claws scraping against a coffin. He strained his ears, listening for any sign of the woman in white, but the only sound was the blood rushing in his ears, a relentless reminder of his brush with death. This silence, he realized, was more terrifying than any scream. It spoke of a watchful presence, a predator toying with its prey. The silence wasn't empty, it was thick with unseen menace, a suffocating blanket of dread that threatened to smother him. He found himself longing for any sound, any natural noise to break the spell, to convince him he wasn't truly alone. A twig snapped in the distance, the sound as loud as a gunshot in the stillness. John flinched, his head whipping around to locate the source. Was she there, lurking in the shadows? Her white dress a ghostly beacon against the dark foliage, or was his mind, frayed by terror, playing tricks on him, populating the darkness with phantoms of his own making? He couldn't be sure. The silence held him captive, a prisoner in a world where his senses had betrayed him, where the line between reality and nightmare blurred with every passing second. Each rustle of leaves, every splash of a fish breaking the surface of the water sent his heart racing, convinced it was the woman in white returning to finish what she had started. Then he heard it, a faint whisper carried on the wind. It was a woman's voice, high-pitched and filled with an unspeakable sorrow that chilled him to the bone. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone, laced with a raw, primal grief, sent shivers down his spine. He strained to listen, his head cocked to one side, trying to discern the source of the voice. Was it coming from the shore, or was it all in his head, a cruel trick of his subconscious, replaying fragments of the horror he had witnessed? The whispers grew louder, swirling around him like a vortex of despair. They seemed to emanate from the very air itself, surrounding him, taunting him with their unseen presence. He gripped the edge of the boat, his knuckles white with tension. The whispers were close now, a chorus of tormented souls rising from the depths of the lake, their voices mingling with the wind in a symphony of despair. He wanted to scream, to block out the sound, but terror had robbed him of his voice, leaving him paralyzed in the grip of the unseen. Then, as quickly as they had begun, the whispers faded, replaced once more by the oppressive silence. John remained frozen in place, his breath caught in his throat, every muscle in his body taut with anticipation. He was a puppet, manipulated by unseen forces, his fate hanging precariously in the balance. The sun, now a fiery orb on the horizon, did little to penetrate the darkness that had seeped into John's soul. The horrors he had witnessed, the sounds that had haunted him, had left an indelible mark, a chilling reminder that some places hold a power beyond human comprehension. He was alive for now, but forever changed by his encounter with the woman in white. Gone was the arrogance, the skepticism that had blinded him to the truth of Crystal Lake. In their place, a raw, primal fear had taken root, twisting his insides, whispering warnings on the wind. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he would never be truly free of the lake's grip. As he stumbled away from the shoreline, each step heavy with dread, he could almost feel her presence lingering in the air, a cold spot on his soul that refused to fade. The whispers, the laughter, the chilling touch of her hand, they were burned into his memory, a macabre souvenir of his night of terror. He didn't look back, but he could feel her eyes on him, watching his every move. Crystal Lake had claimed a part of him that night, a piece of his sanity, of his very essence, leaving behind a void that could never be filled. The sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the world in hues of gold and azure, but Crystal Lake remained untouched by its warmth. The water, once a sparkling invitation, now lay still and cold, a dark mirror reflecting the secrets buried beneath its placid surface. John's encounter served as a chilling reminder. Crystal Lake was not a place to be trifled with. It was a place of whispers and shadows, where the veil between the living and the dead thinned to a whisper. A place where the past refused to stay buried, where ancient sorrows found voice in the rustling leaves and the mournful cries carried on the wind. The woman in white, forever bound to the lake's desolate shores, remained a silent guardian, a vengeful spirit seeking solace in the terror she inflicted upon those foolish enough to ignore the warnings whispered on the wind. Her presence, a chilling reminder of the lake's dark legacy, served as a stark warning to those who dared to venture too close. Crystal Lake would continue to hold its secrets close, its depths concealing the truth of the woman in white and the countless souls lost to her chilling embrace. The stories would persist, whispered around campfires, passed down through generations, each retelling adding another layer of fear and fascination to the lake's macabre mythology. Did John's experience send a shiver down your spine? Did the whispers of the woman in white leave you looking over your shoulder? The legend of Crystal Lake is a chilling reminder that some stories, no matter how unsettling, hold a strange power over us. If you dare to delve deeper into the unknown, if you're brave enough to confront the darkness that lurks at the edges of our world, then subscribe to this channel. We explore the unexplained, the unsettling, the truly terrifying tales that keep you up at night. Do you have a story about Crystal Lake? Have you encountered the woman in white or another chilling entity? Share your experiences in the comments below. Let your voice be heard and join the conversation. But be warned, once you start down the path of the paranormal, there's no turning back. The darkness has a way of finding those who seek it.